6th April 1823. The coast of South Africa was about to witness something strange, something impossible to explain. Those who saw it were left speechless in shock. Children asked their parents what was happening, but the adults could barely speak themselves. Fear flowed through their veins like poison. What kind of event was this? Was it a curse? How could something like this even be possible? The hearts of the witnesses pounded far faster than normal. The coast of South Africa, off the Cape of Good Hope. Early morning, Captain W.F.W. Owen of the HMS Leven stood on the bridge. That morning, the sea was unbelievably calm. The wind was weaker than usual. The horizon was still dark. Dawn had not fully broken yet. There were no waves, no movement, only the open ocean and that heavy, suffocating silence. Then he saw it. A ship separated from the fleet. Or at least, that was what he thought. Owen raised his telescope and looked closer. The ship glowed with a strange light. Its sails were torn, almost chalk white. Its masts looked rotten, its paint peeled away, and yet it was still moving, against the wind. Owen turned immediately. A boat was lowered into the water. They tried to approach it. They tried to close the distance, but the ship simply vanished. It did not disappear over the horizon. It did not enter the fog. It was simply gone. 2 weeks later, when Owen arrived at Simon's Bay Harbor and met the other vessel, he was stunned. The captains compared their logs. That morning, at that exact hour, the HMS Barracuda had been nearly 300 miles away. Impossible. What Owen had seen was not the Barracuda. So what was it? For the rest of his life, he searched for an answer to that question. He died without ever finding one. Exactly 58 years later, 11 July 1881, 4 a.m. Aboard the HMS Bacante, in the open ocean between Australia and South Africa, a 16-year-old boy stood watch. Around him were dozens of sailors. Everyone was silent. The early morning watch was always quiet. That boy's name was George. One day, he would become King George V of England. And on that morning, he saw something so real that it was officially recorded in the Royal Navy logbook. A ship burning with a deep crimson light. Despite its torn sails, it moved at full speed. Against the wind, roughly 180 meters away, close enough to clearly see the details of its masts, close enough to make out figures moving across the deck. 13 men saw it. 3 separate British warships in the same fleet witnessed the same strange red light. All 3 flashed signal lamps at the same time, asking the exact same question. Did you see it too? None of them could explain it. And later that morning, at precisely 10:45 a.m., the sailor who first spotted the ghostly ship fell from the foremast platform into the sea. He died instantly. That logbook still exists today in the British Museum, handwritten, signed by Prince George himself. This is not a legend. These are only 2 moments from what may be the best documented maritime mystery in history. De Vliegende Hollander, the Flying Dutchman, has carried a single terrifying question across more than 300 years, a question capable of silencing even the highest authorities at sea. What was really out there beyond the stars and beyond the horizon? Who was this captain? Most people never spoke of this legend in a good way. Decken. Even his name alone evoked the image of a rebellious captain who defied God and was cursed forever. According to the legend, his curse condemned him to sail the waters of the Cape of Good Hope for eternity. The captain of the Flying Dutchman. The name of this legendary captain inspired operas, appeared in films, and echoed through centuries. But here's the part that may surprise you. Decken was not real. The name comes from a short story published in 1821 in Blackwood's Edinburgh Magazine, a British magazine. The story was titled Vanderdecken's Message Home, and its author remains unknown. In other words, Decken was entirely fictional. Over time, people embraced him as if he had truly existed, but in reality, no such man ever lived. So where did the legend actually come from? The real answer is far more interesting. Bernard Fokke. Sometimes written as Bernard Fokke, this man was a real captain of the Dutch East India Company in the 17th century. And in his era, he was considered one of the fastest sailors alive. In 1678, he completed the voyage from Holland to Java in only 3 months and 4 days. At the time, this was almost unimaginable. The average journey usually took between 6 and 8 months. Completing it in 3 months seemed nearly impossible. A captain had to fight against winds, currents, and entire seasons. But Fokke never slowed down. Records proving this speed still exist today. The delivery dates of the letters he carried to the Governor-General of the East Indies are preserved in historical archives. The numbers are undeniable. Fokke was said to use iron-reinforced masts on his ship. Because of this, even in storms where other captains were forced to lower their sails, he kept his sails fully open. He pushed the limits of nature itself, and the stronger the wind blew, the more sail he raised. And somehow, it worked. But it worked under terrifying pressure, and this unnatural speed fueled dark rumors among sailors. Some believed Fokke had made a deal with the devil. According to the legend, the devil lived aboard his ship in the form of a black dog. In exchange, Fokke would receive perfect winds for 7 years. But once those 7 years ended, the debt would come due. How many years passed? No one knows for sure, because then Fokke's ship vanished. It disappeared during a voyage from Holland to Batavia. No one knew where it sank. No one knew how it vanished. There was no wreckage, no bodies, no survivors. One morning, the ship left port, and it was never seen again. Company records simply marked it as missing, and the world moved on. But sailors did not. According to some historians, Captain Bernard Fokke, known for his obsession with speed, his almost superhuman voyages, and his mysterious disappearance, became the true inspiration behind the legend of the Flying Dutchman. A man standing on the blurred line where real history slowly transformed into myth. And for thousands of sailors who could not explain his disappearance, only one explanation seemed to make sense. God had punished him. But to truly understand the weight of this story, you first need to understand what those waters really meant. There was once a region of terrifying wars, the Jewel of Pirates, a trade route where unimaginable wealth flowed like rivers, and where the cries of battle filled hearts with fear. Many people called it by different names. Sailors preferred to call it the Cape of Storms. The Portuguese called it Cabo das Tormentas, the Cape of Storms. But John II of Portugal changed that name. He believed a more hopeful name was needed to attract trade ships and investment. In the end, he renamed the region the Cape of Good Hope. If you wanted merchants and investors to sail toward a place, it could not carry a name that inspired fear. It needed to promise opportunity. And in that sense, it was the right decision. But one thing never changed. The sailors knew the truth. You could give it a hopeful name or any other name you wanted. In the end, the only thing that changed was the name itself. The ocean never changes. At the southern edge of South Africa, the Atlantic Ocean and the Indian Ocean collide. And this collision is not random. It is systematic, violent, and relentless. The freezing Benguela Current rising from Antarctica meets Africa's warm continental air precisely here. Two different temperature systems, two different oceans, two different air masses, all crashing into each other at the same point. The result? Constant weather shifts, unpredictable storms, and some of the most unstable, chaotic waves in maritime history. During storm season, waves can reach 15 meters high, the height of a 5-story building, a wall of water moving directly toward you, closing over your head. The winds can exceed 130 kilometers per hour, strong enough to rip sails apart, strong enough to snap massive masts made from thick Dutch pine as if they were pieces of bread. And that was only the beginning. The Dutch East India Company, the VOC, lost more than 600 ships in these waters between 1600 and 1800, an average of 3 ships every single year for 2 centuries. Each ship carried between 100 and 150 people. Historians estimate that more than 60,000 sailors drowned here. 60,000. To truly understand that number, imagine a massive stadium filled to capacity. Every single person inside disappears into the sea between a handful of overseas trade voyages. No bodies recovered, no graves, no final goodbye. Today, more than 3,000 documented shipwrecks lie beneath the waters surrounding the Cape of Good Hope, a concentration unlike almost anywhere else on Earth. Now think about those numbers carefully. Every one of those sailors had a family. Someone waiting in Amsterdam, in Rotterdam, in the small fishing villages of Friesland, someone praying for them, someone who promised they would return, and none of them came back. Not even their bodies. The ocean took all of them and returned none. Dutch sailors died in these waters every season, every year. And when survivors finally made it back to port, they needed an explanation for the friends they had left behind. Something to tell the waiting families. Imagine the taverns after a storm. A ship never returned. Why? No wreckage, no survivors, no trace, only the open ocean, and that silence. And to fill that silence, people needed a story. That is where the legend was born. But at the center of the legend was a very real accusation. The Dutch East India Company rewarded captains for speed. Faster voyages meant larger bonuses. Delays meant punishment. Delays meant lost money. So captains sailed directly into storms because waiting carried a very real financial cost. Human lives were weighed against cargo value on a scale, and most of the time the cargo was considered more valuable. That is why the captain's crime in the legend was never just arrogance. The true crime was sacrificing human lives for profit, systematically, repeatedly, for years, and the curse became the perfect punishment. He wanted to complete his voyage at any cost, so he was condemned to sail forever without ever finishing it, never reaching port, never resting, never stopping. And his crew, whose only crime was stepping aboard that ship, were condemned alongside him, forever. The legend of the Flying Dutchman was not created to make people forget those sailors. It was created so they would never be forgotten. This mysterious ghost legend survives in popular culture through works like Pirates of the Caribbean, though with a few differences. And honestly, if the legend of the Flying Dutchman became this widespread, doesn't it make you wonder if there was at least some truth behind it? People always call it a myth, but the evidence was never entirely absent. The oldest known written reference to the legend dates back to 1790. The Scottish traveler John MacDonald mentioned it in a single sentence while describing his 30 years of journeys. Open quote, "The weather was so stormy that the sailors said they saw the Flying Dutchman." Close quote. Just one sentence, but that single sentence reveals a lot. The sailors said, meaning that by 1790, the belief was already deeply rooted among sailors. So common that MacDonald did not even feel the need to explain what the Flying Dutchman was. He assumed his readers already knew. That means the legend had likely existed in oral tradition for decades before that. Most likely since the late 17th century, passed from sailor to sailor across taverns and storm routes. Then, in 1795, George Barrington described another version in his book, Voyage to Botany Bay. During a night watch, a ship appeared out of nowhere and vanished the same way. It was one of those moments where the crew needed each other to believe what they had seen. Because things seen alone at sea are always questioned. Maybe exhaustion, maybe stress, maybe fear. But when an entire crew sees the same thing, that becomes harder to deny. In 1821, Blackwood's Edinburgh magazine introduced the character of Decken and gave the legend a fictional anchor. And that character became powerful for a reason, because he offered a moral explanation for why thousands of sailors died in those waters. Pride, greed, divine punishment. Then, in 1812, Walter Scott connected the legend with piracy for the first time, writing, open quote, "The ship was loaded with immense wealth and had witnessed terrible murder and robbery upon her deck, and the sight of this phantom vessel was regarded by sailors as the worst possible omen." Close quote. Now the legend carried more than a curse. Now there was blood, crime, violence, and that pushed the story into a far darker place. Over time, the rules of the legend evolved. Each generation of sailors added something new to it. If you ever see the Flying Dutchman, never salute it, never signal it, get away as quickly as possible. Because sometimes the ghost ship lowers its longboats into the water. It approaches nearby vessels. Its crew tries to deliver letters written decades earlier to people long dead. Letters written in languages nobody can read anymore. Envelopes addressed to the dead. And if you accept those letters, your ship will sink. Or worse, you will join the crew yourself, forever. And these rules were not meaningless superstitions. Every rule was a defense mechanism created by people who were genuinely terrified. The legend grew so powerful that Richard Wagner turned it into an opera in 1843, Der Fliegende Holländer. The captain became a tragic romantic hero, a man who could be saved through true love. A beautiful version, but one that misses the core horror of the original story. In Pirates of the Caribbean, the Flying Dutchman became a mystical ship carrying souls to the afterlife. Again, entertaining. Again, incomplete. Because the real legend was never about salvation. It never was. Dark Seas, a ghost ship, its ghost captain, and its ghost crew. Just imagining it creates a feeling of endless dread, an eternal nightmare drifting in the middle of the ocean, a cursed route with no beginning and no end. And now, we go deeper, much deeper, because this is where the legend reaches its most critical moment. Some stories are heard, some are believed, but some are officially recorded in naval logbooks. 11th of July, 1881, 4 in the morning. The HMS Bacchante was sailing through the Southern Ocean between Melbourne and Sydney during the second year of its 3-year voyage around the world. On board were 2 future heirs to the British throne, Prince Albert Victor and his younger brother, Prince George. George was only 16 years old. That morning, he was standing watch. At exactly 4 a.m., the forward lookout spotted something off the port side of the bow and reported it immediately. He tried to describe what he saw. Red, glowing, phosphorescent. But beyond that, he could not explain it. Officers rushed onto the bridge. George ran with them. Within minutes, several senior officers stood side by side, staring into the darkness at the exact same thing. The object was only about 200 yards away, roughly 180 meters. This was not some vague shadow on the horizon. This was close enough to see details. You could distinguish the stitching on the sails, the shape of the masts, even figures standing on the deck. Later, George wrote these exact words into his personal journal, words that still exist today in the British Museum, handwritten on those aging pages. Open quote, 11th of July. At 4 a.m., the Flying Dutchman crossed our bows, a strange red light as of a phantom ship all aglow, in the midst of which the masts, spars, and sails of a brig 200 yards distant stood out in strong relief as she came up on the port bow. The officer of the watch from the bridge clearly saw her, as did the quarterdeck midshipman, who was sent at once to the forecastle. But on arriving there, no vestige nor any material ship was to be seen either near or right away to the horizon. Close quote. 13 men saw it. And it was not just the Bacchante. 2 other Royal Navy warships in the same fleet, the HMS Tourmaline and the HMS Cleopatra, also reported seeing the same strange red light. Each vessel flashed signal lamps to the others, asking the exact same question. Did you also see that strange red light? 3 separate British Royal Navy warships. More than 13 trained witnesses whose careers depended on accurate reporting. Official naval records. This was not a tavern rumor. This was documented by one of the most disciplined institutions on Earth. And then, the legend seemed to confirm itself. At 10:45 that same morning, the sailor who first spotted the ghostly ship, a young and highly respected seaman described as one of the most promising aboard, fell from the top of the foremast onto the deck below. He died instantly. George continued writing in his journal. Open quote, "He was a very smart topman and one of the most promising young hands in the ship. Everyone is very sorry at his loss." Close quote. Later that afternoon, the sailor was buried at sea. But the story did not end there. When they arrived in Sydney, they learned something even stranger. The HMS Cleopatra had also lost a sailor that same morning. He had fallen overboard. 2 ships, 2 deaths, the same morning. And George added one final note to his journal. Open quote, "The admiral at the station was also laid up sick." Close quote. 3 separate tragedies, all after the sighting. Coincidence? Maybe. But for more than 300 years, the pattern in this legend has never changed. Prince George never publicly spoke about the incident again. He became George Fist. He ruled through World War I. He led an empire. But he never explained what he saw that morning. And the journal entries remained. He never destroyed them, never erased them. Those pages still exist today, written in his own hand. Among those who saw this curse, there was even a king, and not just any king, but one who had led the world through war. At this point, are these ghosts merely a legend or something real? And if it is only a legend, then what about all these witnesses? It feels like an equation filled with too many unknowns. And the records left behind by living witnesses are a whole different matter. A ghost ship, a ghost captain, a ghost crew. The ocean is full of secrets. Let's continue investigating the detailed timelines. Let's look before and after 1881. 6th April 1823, where we began. Captain Owen of the HMS Leven saw that strange ship off Danger Point. He wanted to approach it. A boat was lowered into the water. The ship disappeared. 2 weeks later, when they compared the logs with the other vessel at Simon's Bay, the truth emerged. HMS Barracuda had been 300 miles away that morning. What Owen saw was not what he saw, and he lived the rest of his life never knowing what it truly was. A whaling boat crew watched the ghost ship sail directly toward a reef off the Cape of Good Hope at full speed. It crashed, then vanished. No wreckage, no broken wood, no trace. Multiple crew members gave testimony, and every account matched the others. 26 January 1923, 2 British naval officers saw the Flying Dutchman and officially reported it to the Society for Psychical Research. 4th Officer Stone documented his 15-minute observation. Not only with words, he also made a detailed drawing of the ship. 2nd Officer Bennett independently confirmed the same sighting, 2 separate witnesses, independent testimonies. The same ship, the same moment. Glencairn Beach, just south of Cape Town. According to South African newspaper reports, dozens of coastal residents witnessed something at the same time. Their descriptions matched each other with shocking consistency. A massive 3-masted sailing ship from the 1600s, moving against the wind, figures visible on the deck. No sound, no waves striking the hull, no sails cracking in the wind, complete silence. And then slowly, first the sails, then the hull, vanished piece by piece until nothing remained. During World War II, the submarine crews of Karl Donitz reportedly encountered the ghost ship east of Suez and in other locations. According to the statements of surviving German sailors, they feared seeing that ghost again more than they feared the full strength of the Allied naval forces. The Dutch cargo ship Straat Magelhan. Its captain reported that they almost collided with the Flying Dutchman. They were forced to change course suddenly. 1 minute later, it was gone. Now step back and look at this entire list as a whole. The witnesses change, from 17th century sailors to 20th century war officers. The centuries change. The technology they use changes. But the thing they describe never changes. The same location, off the Cape of Good Hope. The same ship, torn sails, ancient design, red light. The same movement, silently traveling against the wind. The same ending, sudden disappearance without leaving a trace. If these were merely random hallucinations or simple misidentifications, we would expect variation. Different ship types, different colors and lights, different behaviors, different locations. Instead, there is an extraordinarily consistent pattern stretching across more than 300 years. So, what do scientists say about this centuries-long ghostly mystery? What kind of studies did they conduct? And is there any final conclusion at all? Because we are not talking about something recent. We are talking about a ghost ship, a ghost captain, and a ghost crew that keep appearing somewhere, even as centuries pass and witnesses change. Scientists and skeptics have proposed many explanations for these sightings over the years. The strongest one is the Fata Morgana, also known as a superior mirage. How does it work? Layers of air with different temperatures act like a natural lens. Cold air is dense. When it settles beneath warm air, the light passing through bends at unusual angles. This refraction can make objects below the horizon appear suspended in the air. It can bring a very distant ship closer. It can stretch or compress the image until it becomes unrecognizable. And when the temperature layers change, the mirage suddenly disappears. In less than a second. The Cape of Good Hope is the perfect environment for this phenomenon. The cold Benguela current coming from Antarctica constantly meets Africa's warm continental air. This creates chronic temperature inversions, almost every day, almost every hour. This theory strongly explains certain things. Why the sightings are always concentrated in the same place. Why they suddenly appear and disappear. Why a ship can seem to move against the wind when there is no wind at all, because the real ship being reflected is actually moving normally in the wind, but the mirage reverses it. But there are things it does not explain. Fata Morgana images usually reflect objects located 15 to 30 kilometers away. The witnesses aboard the HMS Bacante officially recorded that they saw the ship only 200 yards away, around 180 meters. At that distance, a mirage cannot produce the details the witnesses described. The texture of torn sails, figures moving across the deck, and most importantly, the red phosphorescent glow spreading around the ship, something not seen in ordinary mirages. The second explanation is bioluminescence. Certain plankton emit light when disturbed, creating glowing patches across the ocean. Especially at night, in warm waters, these patches can sometimes take on recognizable forms. In rare cases, they may resemble the outline of a ship. But bioluminescence is vague and scattered light. It does not produce solid images with masts and sails. And it cannot explain daytime sightings in any way. The third explanation, and perhaps the most disturbing one, comes from maritime historians. There are more than 3,000 documented shipwrecks in the waters around the Cape of Good Hope. The vast majority are wooden ships. Over centuries, they decayed, but some sections may still remain intact. Under rare conditions, powerful currents can dislodge a centuries-old wreck from the seabed. If air pockets formed inside the structure, which is possible, especially within compartments and storage areas, the wreck could rise to the surface. It could remain there for minutes, sometimes longer. Then the sea would take it back again. This explains the sudden appearances and disappearances. It explains why the ship always looks old and damaged. It explains why it is always seen in the same region. But this theory creates a larger question while solving another. Because if people are truly seeing a wreck rising to the surface, then they are looking at a real ship still containing the sailors who drowned in those waters centuries ago. A mass grave, rising briefly from the ocean floor, remaining there for a moment, and then returning to the darkness once again. Even the rational explanation itself is terrifying. Up to this point, throughout all this research, we have learned many disturbing things. But has a thought now appeared in your mind against the ocean, and especially against the Cape of Good Hope, that you had never known before? And against the oceans themselves? Isn't it very strange? This mystery is not sufficiently convincing through only the proposed theories or scientific explanations. No, never. The world is full of strange things. So many unsolved secrets and mysteries are waiting somewhere, and that is deeply terrifying. There is one question that needs to be asked. Why this legend? There are dozens of ghost ship legends in maritime history. Why did this one survive so long and so powerfully? Why does the legend not die while science offers explanations? Because the Flying Dutchman represents a real fear, real losses, real deaths, and a real injustice. Every one of the 60,000 sailors who died in these waters between 1600 and 1800 had a story. Each one believed he would return home when boarding the ship. Each one left someone behind at the harbor, a wife, children, a mother, and none of these people even received a farewell. The Dutch East India Company sent them to this death by paying bonuses for speed, by giving punishments for delay, by financially encouraging captains to sail into the open sea during storms instead of waiting safely in port. This system operated for decades, for centuries. Thousands of people paid for this profit with their lives. The legend is the symbolic echo of this truth. The captain's crime was not only personal arrogance, it was the system he represented. And the curse, sailing forever, never reaching port, never stopping, was the perfect counterpart of that system. The meaning of life exists in arrival, in home, in rest, in completion. The curse contains none of these things, only endless voyage, endless storm, endless going nowhere. And that is why the legend does not die, because what it tells does not die. Putting profit before human life. This is not a crime belonging only to the 17th century. This is a crime reproduced again in every age. The legend tells us this. Do not forget, they existed. They gave their lives on this journey. And if you allow them to be forgotten, then in a way, you also join that crew into the endless silence. So, does this legend still exist today? Is it still continuing? The information you are about to hear may be disturbing, and these records are from very recent times. The sightings continue even in the modern age. In 2011, the crew of a fishing boat off the coast of Cape Town reported that an old sailing ship appeared within the fog for 3 minutes and then dissolved away. The Coast Guard recorded no ship movement in the area at that time. And right now, as these words reach you, those waters are still there off the coast of South Africa near the Cape of Good Hope. The cold Benguela current is still mixing the Atlantic and Indian Oceans together. the 3,000 wrecks are still lying on the ocean floor. And sometimes, under very rare conditions, something from the seabed moves upward. Science explains the mirage theory, but it cannot prove what 13 trained Royal Navy officers saw from a distance of 180 meters. Historians document the shipwrecks, but they cannot confirm that Fokke's ship rose from the depths. Psychologists describe mass hallucination, but they cannot explain how 3 independent warships hallucinated the exact same thing on the same morning at the same time. There is one final sentence written in Prince George's journal, open quote, "Tourmaline and Cleopatra were on our port bow and flashed asking if we had seen the strange red light." Close quote. 3 ships, the same light, 4 o'clock in the morning. What was that light? For more than 300 years, nobody has known for certain. And perhaps that is exactly why it creates such deep fear, that disturbing space between what can be explained and what seems impossible. Neither completely science, nor completely legend. Something in between, uncertain, silent, unanswered. Maybe it was an optical illusion. Maybe it was a real ship rising from the ocean floor. Or maybe Bernard Fokke is still out there, with iron-reinforced masts, with winds given to him by the devil himself, forever trying to complete his voyage. And if one day, in those waters, you ever see a ship burning with a red glow, with torn sails moving against the wind, do what sailors have done for 300 years. Look away, because some questions are far more dangerous than their answers.